I know it's kind of weird, Christian show, talking about an atheist, but he actually argues that the best way for Christians to handle the problem of evil is using the G.E. Moore shift, which after my research, I was like, yeah, this is great, because there's really no answer to it. Hey everybody, and welcome to Epic Everyday, our weekday podcast for busy, stressed out Christians who don't want to just get through the day and instead want to be able to thrive. I'm Liz Frericks, and this is my husband Evan.
Hey.
And we're so glad you guys are here with us today on Tuesday.
Yeah, we're slogging through this one, the suffering week, but it really is a rich topic.
Yes. So today, since it's Tuesday, we're going to talk about surrender. It's difficult to surrender to someone you don't trust, which we kind of talked a little bit about yesterday. But, since surrender means kind of relaxing in, allowing everything to go to the Lord instead of hanging on to little pieces of your life and being like, I'm going to keep this one for myself. And you can make the decisions over here, but being fully surrendered.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to surrender, one evidence of not trusting God might be blaming Him for this or that, or wanting to blame somebody for something, for this thing that I don't like, this thing I'm suffering through, this injustice, whether it's real or just perceived.
And
it's still a big deal.
Injustice, though. Yeah. I mean, we're not saying injustice doesn't exist, because obviously, if you read the news at all, injustice is everywhere. And the Bible is very clear that injustice is everywhere and that God is not on the side of the unjust. He's the just God. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but He's also the champion of the downtrodden and who are suffering from the injustice, And that's really all of us, too. I mean, in this sinful world, with real injustice, we want to put the blame somewhere.
I think we do put the blame somewhere. I think there is a place to put the blame.
Yeah, there is. So what do you mean?
Well, I think it's okay to blame somebody for injustice because there are consequences to injustice. I mean, just like if there's a car accident and, it's an accident, whoever wasn't trying to do it, but they still were careless in some fashion, they still have to pay for the accident. Yeah,
I guess maybe I'm thinking of more intangible. Well, I don't know. I'm thinking of like kids when something's not going their way, they want to blame their sister or their parents or something for not giving them the thing that they want, and that is suffering for them. And I think we tend to do that too. I mean, or like if they're getting punished maybe for something that they actually did wrong, they're wanting to keep blaming some other people to get out of it.
Right.
Like maybe that's the kind of blame that I'm talking
Adam
about.
Adam and Eve, where Adam's like, this woman that you gave me.
Right. Yeah. Excuse making and blaming for things that I brought upon myself maybe. Or
so rather than holding accountable kind of blame, but I'm passing the buck kind of blame.
Or it has to do with the kind of blame, I guess. I mean, so I think with suffering, ultimately, I think Christians and non-Christians, if they think about it far enough, the blame was ultimately on God, right? If He's
because
so
He
powerful,
allowed it to happen.
right? And then it's the blame for like, why is life so difficult, and why did my child die, or why did my child get sick, or this thing that just seems random. A random bad thing is happening,
right? Like
why is that kind of suffering happening?
Hurricanes or
And so maybe that's more the kind of blame I'm talking about, where it's like, I don't see, somebody robbed a bank and he went to jail. Yeah, that guy, it's his fault for robbing the bank. He caused, the bank manager all the stress and suffering, and then now he's suffering because but it's not, it's this other kind of, just life's so difficult and it's so stressful and bad things happen I don't understand. But where am I putting the blame there? And I guess what I'm getting at is that we're trying to figure out where the first cause of the suffering is coming from.
Yeah.
It's so important to us to put it somewhere, as if the suffering is the most powerful, or this random act of just chaos is the most powerful force in the universe. Like we're giving it this pedestal of like because if we're getting all this attention, maybe you can help me make sense of what I'm trying to say. Like
So
when we fixate on it so much, we're raising it up as this sort of primary thing, like that suffering is all powerful and chaos is all powerful. And why isn't God doing something about it?
kind of like money, how like money is our provider, I think, for a lot of people. And so the thing that was caught growing up, it wasn't taught, but caught, was that money is not controllable. Like
It comes and it
it
goes.
comes and it goes, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
And it's hard. And
I think that is what I'm getting at. We're fixated on this result of something. Money is a result of hard work and kind of intentionality and of a number of things. It's not just a random.
right.
And I think suffering too. I mean, but then suffering's harder because, if an earthquake comes or a forest fire or a flood, it's like you can't blame the president for that. You might want to, or the governor or something.
Yeah.
Or the engineer who built that levee didn't do it right. It's like, okay, I mean,
Right.
it's just it's so powerful and so out of control. But we're still fixated on this little thing. I think that money is probably a good example. Like, instead of the bigger picture of what's really going on.
Right.
And we want to, as Christians, shift our mind. I think it's another thing that we need to flip upside down. Let God show us the right way to look at it.
Yeah. It's hard, though.
Yeah, because it's so in your face.
Yeah, well, and it's so real. Like,
It is.
you can't argue. Like I was saying yesterday, people that are like, don't sweat the small stuff. It's all small stuff. Is like, dang, okay, have you seriously never been through any kind of abuse or illness or...
Well, yeah, and I think we do that to each other as Christians all the time, too. It's like we're trying to make you feel better, and so the stuff we have to offer is not real good stuff.
Right, platitudes.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Because we're just trying to get past the uncomfortable, icky feelings.
Right.
And back into like, hey, let's be happy again.
Ugh, man, I hate that when somebody's like, man, I had a really hard week. I've been really sick this week. Really tired, and they're like, well, God's redeeming everything. Like, ugh, it's not what I'm trying to say.
Right.
I just want to say this is hard,
might be true.
and I'm cranky about it and frustrated.
So I think that's a tricky spot. Like, we want to flip this over on its head and not be fixated on the suffering, but we can't totally write off the suffering as not real either.
Yeah, because it is real, and there are real consequences, just like with the car accident. I mean, if you get in a car accident, somebody's got to fix the car.
Yeah, and you may, there's repercussions.
Somebody's got to deal with the medical bills.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just magically make them disappear. There's still problems that have to be addressed, regardless of whether it's on purpose or on an accident.
So this thing we hinted at the end of the show yesterday helps me get this back right side up in God's economy. And I'll let you explain it because it's such a cool thing that you found.
Yeah. So when I was in college, I had to do a paper on the problem of evil. And I ended up reading William Rao. He's an atheist. And he has a pretty awesome section on the problem of evil, which you wouldn't. I know it's kind of weird, Christian show, talking about an atheist. But he actually argues that the best way for Christians to handle the problem of evil is using the G.E. Moore shift, which after my research, I was like, yeah, this is great, because there's really no answer to it.
Yeah, but it's like, the G.E. Moore shift, like everybody knows what that is.
Yeah.
More people should, though.
More people should,
That's why we're talking about it.
So the way it works, logically, when you look at the problem of evil, usually the way it's constructed is something like this. Meaningless suffering and evil exist. If God is all good and all powerful, he would prevent meaningless suffering. Therefore, God doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's classic atheist argument.
Right. Or a good God or an all-powerful God. I mean, you change God in some fashion. But if you flip that argument on its head, the G.E. Moore shift is where you start with the opposite of whatever your conclusion is. So
and you have to see if the logic is just as sound, right?
The logic is just as sound.
I know, but so anyway, go ahead.
So if you start with the inverse, so if the argument is like P and Q, therefore R. So if you start with the inverse of your conclusion, an all good, all powerful God does exist, you keep your middle proposition the same. If God is all good and all powerful, he wouldn't allow meaningless suffering and evil to exist, then use the inverse of your previous first proposition and end up with, therefore, meaningless evil and suffering do not exist.
Yeah. And I'll put the formula in the description of the show. Like with the letters, it's kind of easier to see, but it is a powerful thing. It's like if we start with God's love and God's power,
who God says that He is,
then, and yet we still see what seems to us chaos and suffering. But the only conclusion we can then draw is that it must not be meaningless.
Right.
It must not be out of control. God somehow has the reins still.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about Ocean 13.
Yeah.
Because, in that one, I won't give the whole spiel, but basically at one point, there's a character that is supposed to be evaluating this hotel, and they make his life miserable.
Yeah.
And they, before they're getting ready to do this, they're like, I kind of feel bad for the guy. And one of the characters is like, well, he's getting a Susan B. Anthony at the airport, which is like winning this slot machine.
Right.
So
he's
he's
like,
going to get
would you do it for $10 million?
And he's like, nope, but I do it for $11 million. So at the end, they give him $11 million. And I think, he never finds out why he went through that. But he does get $11 million at the end.
That's right.
So I think sometimes it's like that where we go through difficulty and we don't necessarily know why. But if we knew why, we might be willing to do it anyway, Yeah.
If we have to believe that. If we had God's perspective. Yeah. I was just reading 1 Peter 1 this week, and in the middle there, I don't know which verse it is, but it's talking about, the power of the cross and Christ's suffering and it related to salvation. And then there's just this little line of like, and this is something the angels marvel at and want to look into.
Right.
And they have the full perspective, and yet they're still like, this is amazing. I want to know more about this. And so we will get a heavenly perspective, we have that to look forward to.
Yeah,
but
it's just hard when we're in the middle of it.
Yeah, and that's why we're talking about this on Surrender Day, because it's hard to surrender to that and to trust that God still has those reins in His hand, but He does.
And that's why we're talking about this the week after we talked about God's love, because we have to start with God's love. Because if we start, that's the whole point of the GE Moore shift. Wherever you start is going to determine where you end up. If you start out with suffering is awful and you're just, like Peter looking at the waves.
Pointless and meaningless, yeah.
Right. If you start out with that, you're going to be overwhelmed and you're going to sink. But if you start out with, this is God's character, that means that I can trust Him. So I obviously don't have a full perspective on whatever it is that I'm going through. So I'm going to keep trusting God anyway.
Yeah. That's our only option.
Right. Hopefully that was encouraging to you guys. The GE Moore shift is one of my favorite things, to just take the whole problem of evil, problem of suffering off the table when talking to atheists and be like, well, we have totally different worldviews, so we're not going to be able to argue about whether or not suffering is meaningless because, Christians believe we won't find out the true meaning until after we're all dead, until after Jesus comes back. And so it's pretty impossible to be like, yep, this is what I think.
We're not actually on the same platform at that point debating the same thing. We need to find something else to discuss.
Right. Exactly. And it's helpful for me personally, when I look at my sufferings and I'm just like, Lord, why did you let this happen? Then I have to go back to, who's God? Okay, He loves me more than I love my kids. He loves me more than that. So I can just trust Him. Thanks to everybody that's been sharing the show and listening to the show. We really appreciate it. If you have found this podcast helpful, please continue to share it. Pick whether today is going to be awesome or not, because you have a choice about that.
Yeah.
And come back tomorrow, and we're going to keep talking about suffering and how to stay centered in the middle of that.
Yeah, I look forward to talking to you then.
All right. We love you guys, and we're praying for you. Have a wonderful Tuesday.
Yeah, see ya.